You've certainly heard about the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, and Queen, and I bet that it was with your parent or just when you were sticking your noses in your grandpa old stuff. But what would you do if you had to pick up 10 records from your rocking grandpa vinyl collection? So don't worry, today I'm going to show you up a selection of 10 iconic classic rock albums that you should listen to and also recommend to everyone who is showing a little interest toward music. Hello everyone, you're in the Algerian Black Pearl with your old-fashioned podcast, The Rockin Fella. And here we have as an official slogan, جديد حبو والقديم موت عليه. As I mentioned before, so today we're gonna through a selection of 10 classic rock albums. So I would just like you to notice that what I mean about classic rock albums, it's all the songs, albums, and bands that were performing in the 60s, 70s, until the mid 80s. So here we go now. Number 10. So for this one, I selected Who's Next by The Who. You may wonder who is The Who or who were The Who. Well, it sounds like a very interesting joke. I should write it down, but never mind. So, The Who was a British rock band formed in London in 1964, and for me, their fifth album released in 1971 and called Who Is Next is the most terrific one, because this album was born from an aborted project called Lifehouse, and this project ought to be a kind of opera rock or let's say futuristic film soundtrack. And then you will find in this album that 8 of their tracks were coming from this project. And there is also another interesting fact about this album, but the band The Who started the recording in the Rolling Stone mobile studio in the collaboration of Mick Jagger. And you will certainly recognize in this album one of the most notorious rock track, We Won't Get Fooled Again, and also Baba O'Reilly. If you are a fan of CSA, Miami and Manhattan, تشفوا عليهم. Number 9, I selected Pearl by Janis Joplin. You may wonder, who is Janis Joplin? Well, I think that most of you knows who is or who was Amy Winehouse, but try to go back in the 60s and the 70s amid a flower power and peace and love revolution. So basically Janis Joplin was the queen of this movement, and if you listen to her song you will, let's say, feel that although if she was singing the blues and the soul, but she was yelling happiness and life. So Pearl was the second solo studio album by Janis Joplin, and for this album she was supported by a Canadian rock band called the Full Tilt Boogie Blues Band. And you will find some interesting tracks in this album, such as Me and Bobby McGee, when you will hear Janis singing and also playing acoustic guitar. And there is also another fact about this album. The track Buried Alive in the Blues was only an instrumental one just because Janis Joplin sadly passed away before the recording of the vocal session of this song. Number 8, I selected the White Album by the Beatles. If you don't know who were the Beatles, it means that you are living in another planet. So, why we call it the White Album? Because of the cover and the sleeve of the album. It was white and blank. So, for this album, most of the songs were recorded when the Beatles were attending to meditation lessons in India. And also it was a very fruitful album for the guitarist of the band, George Harrison, who released and composed one of the most terrific rock songs, namely While My Guitar Gently Weeps. But besides, this album was recorded in, let's say, in the tough atmosphere. And according to what Paul McCartney said, the band was about to break up when they were recording this album. And also another interesting thing about this album, the guitar part of the song While My Guitar Gently Weeps was played by Sir Eric Clapton. Number 7. First of all, I would like to apologize for all the Beatles fans, but I selected Let It Bleed by the Rolling Stones. So you may wonder, why did I select Let It Bleed? In my opinion, this album marked a return and a comeback to the roots and the basics for the Rolling Stones, because it is important to notice that at their early days, the Rolling Stones used to be such rhythm and blues band. And you will find in this record one of the most terrific opening track of the history of classic rock album, namely Gimme Shelter. What an awesome track. And you will also find some covers of blues standards, such as Love in Vain, which was written and composed by the great bluesman Robert Johnson. And also there is one interesting fact about this album, but it was the first time when the guitarist of the band, Keith Richards, sang on this album. Number 6, Led Zeppelin 4 by Led Zeppelin. You might wonder why did they call their album Led Zeppelin number 4 or Led Zeppelin 4? Just because it was, let's say, an answer to a dismissive critical reaction campaign which was carried out by the media and the press. And for this time, the guitarist of the band, Jimmy Page, decided to issue and release an unnamed album. And you will find in this album one of the most mind-blowing tracks in the history of classic rock, Stairway to Heaven. What a terrific track, because Stairway to Heaven is, let's say, a mix or a composition of a large scale of musical influence and musical style. So, for example, at the beginning, you will find a guitar picking in, let's say, Renaissance musical style. And in the second part, you will find, let's say, a slow rock ballad. And for the third part, it goes heavier, and then you will have the heavy metal or the heavy rock. And there is an awesome ending in a cappella way performed by Robert Plant. And I would like you also to notice that for this album was recorded mostly in a countryside house in England. Number 5, for the 5th position, I selected Rumors by Fleetwood Mac. If you are planning to have a long road trip, so I will strongly recommend you to play this album all along your way, because since this album used to be, let's say, a pop music album, but for me it became one of the most iconic classic rock albums, because you will find some of the most mind-blowing rock tracks, such as The Chain, Don't Stop, Dreams, and You Can Go Your Own Way. So if you are planning to have a road trip, you can go your own way and just play this album. Number 4, The Doors by The Doors. Who is knocking on the door? The Doors. Too much Doors for this time. So, who were the Doors? The Doors was an American band led by most iconic rock star Jim Morrison. And for this first album, it was such of breakthrough in the musical universe, because the Doors brought a new sound and brought, let's say, a fresh breath for the rock music world, because you will recognize in this album a large scale of influence coming up from the jazz or also from the musical and a kind of psychedelic music and mainly the blues. And you will find in this album the most, let's say, notorious tracks of the Doors, such as Break On Through on the Other Side, Alabama Song, Light My Fire, and the iconic The End. Number 3, A Night at the Opera by Queen. And when we say Queen, Bohemian Rhapsody. And when we say Bohemian Rhapsody, Freddie Mercury. So for this album, and beyond being a classic rock album, it was such trip through the world of Queen. And I think that when the band were thinking about recording this album, they were just trying and committing to make people feel the experience, or just leaving the recording session. Number 2, for the second position, I selected The Wall by the Pink Floyd, and I know that most of Pink Floyd fans would say you should select The Dark Side of the Moon in this rank. But I do believe that beyond being a classic rock album, so The Wall was such, let's say, adventure, because it is important to notice that The Wall is an opera rock that told us the story about a character called Pink. So who was Pink? So Pink was a rock star who is trying to make himself self-isolated from the world thanks to, let's say, an imaginary walls. And this is why they called the album The Wall. And in this album you will find some of the most iconic rock songs. Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2. We don't need no education. Bum, chara, bum, bum. And you have also another terrific track such as Hey You and the mind-blowing Comfortably Numb with the great guitar solo from David Gilmour. Number 1. First of all, I would like to apologize for all the Beatles, Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, Queen and Pink Floyd fans. But for me, the most iconic classic rock album is simply Are You Experienced It by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Well, it was the first studio album of Jimi Hendrix because Jimi Hendrix used to release before only singles. But for this time, he decided to record a full and faithful album. And this record was such groundbreaking in the musical world because Jimi Hendrix brought a new way, a fresh breath to the musical universe. And you will recognize loads of, let's say, musical style in this album, mainly the blues, the psychedelic rock. And there is a relevant fact about this album, but this one was selected by the National Library of the Congress thanks to his impact on the culture. That's it for today. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode and I would be very glad if you share with me your own selection. So here I am, Anis. See you next time. Meanwhile, take care of yourself and mostly of your ears.